Everyone. So today I will be sharing my interview experience with Air India. So I was selected for the UI developer reactjs interview after a hacker rank exam. So that was done like virtually from our home itself. Like they just provided a link and we will attempt that hacker rank, and they just wanted some 25 percentage pass mark. So I cleared that, and then I was called for the interview for the UI developer. So they first went to the css part, and here in the css part they actually went on to some of the scenario based, like how you will implement a scroll bar. So what all things you will note for having a scroll bar, and then like overflow scroll, right? So those little things. Then they asked me they wanted to implement a chat box. So what are css positions that you will consider? So I mentioned about the fixed and all. So they asked me about fixed versus sticky, and then absolute, relative, then what is the default one, and those things. So they asked, when I was answering, they were asking one of the questions after that. Then completely the first part was the css positions. Then they like asked me some ways that I could implement, placing a button in the center of the screen. So I was comfortable with flexbox, so I mentioned that. But they wanted me to have like some four ways, transform, top, positioning, those things, right? So they wanted me to have some four ways to know, and and that too they want us to write in the code itself, having a button, having a html element, and then having a class, how we will write that. And then they asked me, like, once I mentioned about flexbox and all, they went on ask like what all I know. So I mentioned about css grid. So what they asked me, like, what is that, and why we are using it, and what is the advantage of that, those things. It went on like that. Then we moved into html, so it was pretty easier part. So html, they asked me, like, what are the semantic elements, what and how we will attain the accessibility. So I just know about the area labels. So I mentioned that, but they wanted to know much further, how we can make it SEO friendly. So those things, they were even they also told me, like, what all things can be implemented. And then html versus html5. So mainly, like, what all tags. So and each of the tags, they explain, like, can we place the footer at the top, is there a problem for that? So those things, some a little bit explanation as well from my side for each of the tags. Then html element types, inline block, so what is the difference between them, and then what is the difference between inline and inline block. So it went on like that. And then moved on to the javascript. So what is javascript was the first question. So they asked me directly that. So I mentioned about some behavior, and they asked me further, like, anything further, you just tell, like, so some 2-3 ways that it's asynchronous, those things I mentioned it. So why it is asynchronous, and how the asynchronous can be achieved, how we are coding it. So I mentioned about the prompts. And also then they asked me about event loop. What is the how it is performing if we have a console.log and timeout and a promise, then how it is working. And then they asked me about the javascript data types. So primitives and non-primitives, but they focused on non-primitives mainly, like how like primitive one we are much familiar, right? So non-primitive types also, what all are there, what you know. And then type of question. So type of number is what, and type of number is what. So a little practical questions. And hoisting, the basic concept, hoisting, function currying, closure. So function currying, they asked me to write a program. And for closure also, they wanted to have write a program on a counter. So how it is different from a normal function, to showcase that. Then type coercion, string and numbers, like how it's getting, then double equal to that, strict equal to, right? So those differences. Then higher order functions. And then memoization. Then they asked me, like, whether you know about node.js. I said I don't know. So they told me, like, you should know. So a little bit, just what is that itself you should know. So they just told me, like, what it is. And then promise versus async await, a question came on that. So yeah. And then they asked me, like, don't think about react, but how you will achieve some optimization things. So They asked me like how you will reduce the bundle sizes, so what all ways you know, those things. And then on moving on to the coding part, they asked me to write a program to find all anagrams in a string, and then program to display valid parenthesis. So if 2 is given, so this is valid. And then